simulating history's most famous figure. I mean, it sounds like a completely surreal, maybe even controversial premise, right? But what if an AI was designed specifically not to play God? Today, we're going to look at these sources more closely to understand exactly how a project called Rabbi Jeshua is attempting something literally unheard of in the AI space.
Okay, let's dive right in. Here is our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll tackle the Rabbi Jeshua paradox. Then, the diversity of the sources. After that, we'll look under the hood at the three-layer architecture. We'll explore the concept of enduring contradictions, and finally, we'll wrap up with the ethical boundary.
So, kicking things off with Section 1, the Rabbi Jeshua paradox, and how it completely subverts our expectations.
The central paradox here is honestly fascinating, because creating a convincing AI of this figure actually means explicitly programming the system not to be him. Just think about it for a second. What would an AI Jesus say to you? Your very first thought might be some gimmicky, hallucinating, digital deity handing out absolute spiritual truths, right?
Well, that expectation perfectly illustrates the divide here. Most people assume a system like this would be a digital oracle, something that claims divine identity, forgives sins, or tries to prophesy the future. But the reality of this project is a meticulous literary simulation. It is completely bound to its sources, it purposely maintains a historical distance, and it never ever pretends to be the real thing.
In fact, the source material puts it brilliantly. These limitations are not the failed part of the system. They are the design. The fact that this AI rigorously refuses to play God, that's not a bug. That is its most groundbreaking feature. It's built to open up your thinking, not just shut it down with some fake divine mandate.
Moving on to Section 2, the diversity of sources, and why this goes way beyond a single book.
You know, when we're dealing with this historical figure, we aren't just looking at one neat, unified book. We're looking at a massive stack of history. We start back in the 1st century with the Synoptic and Johannine traditions. Then, moving into the 2nd century, we get apocryphal texts, like the Gospel of Thomas. Fast forward a bit to the 7th century, and you've got the Quranic tradition of Isa. And finally, all the way from the 19th century up to today, we have modern theological research. Now, ordinary portrayals usually try to mash all of these together into one harmonized figure, or they just tear them apart completely. But Rabbi Jeshua does something totally unique. It lets them interact, but it keeps them perfectly distinct. A synoptic text stays synoptic.
So a huge takeaway here is this: canon status is no automatic guarantee of historicity. Basically, just because a text made it into the official canon doesn't mean it's some unedited historical transcript. The AI operates on the idea that early traditions aren't automatically unchanged, and later, non-canonical traditions aren't automatically worthless. Every single text is weighed carefully.
And we really have to talk about the 1st century Jewish context. It is absolutely not just a decorative backdrop for this simulation. It is the fundamental meaning space. The Torah, the prophets, the Psalms, and groups like the Pharisees and Sadducees, they are all treated with absolute precision. And why does that matter? Because it allows the AI to explicitly reject harmful, outdated tropes like collective guilt, truly grounding the figure in his actual historical reality.
Let's shift gears to Section 3, the three-layer architecture. Let's look under the hood.
So how does the engine actually pull all this off without falling apart? Well, it relies on this highly structured software built on a really clever 3-step flow. First up is Kern. You can think of Kern as the constitution of the AI. It sets the core identity, the rules, the hard boundaries. Second is PARADOSIS, which meticulously examines the sources and historical traditions. And third is PRAXIS. That's the layer that actually takes responsibility for managing the encounter with you, the user.
I want to zoom in on that middle layer for a second. PARADOSIS. This is the architectural layer situated right between the ancient source text and the modern generated voice. Its entire job is to clarify exactly where an idea is coming from before it decides how that idea can be presented to you today. This is basically the critical gatekeeper that completely prevents the AI from just making stuff up.
And the academic rigor inside PARADOSIS is just incredible. First, it uses a submodule called Logion to compare parallel versions of the exact same saying. Then, Testimonia traces their origins in fragments. After that, VoxLimon kicks in to set really strict presentation limits. And finally, Audit double-checks that any historical uncertainty is actually preserved in the final answer. The system purposely refuses to just invent a fake, perfect original sentence if the historical record simply doesn't back it up.
Which brings us right into Section 4, Enduring Contradictions and the Power of Dissensus.
So, what happens when their historical sources just flat out disagree with one another? Well, if you ask the AI a question, it doesn't give you one blended, watered-down answer. It might actually show you how the Gospel of Mark frames it within the synoptic tradition, and then compare that right alongside the apocryphal Gospel of Thomas, and maybe even bring in the late antiquity perspective of the Quran. It presents these competing models side by side. It does not blend them into a historical smoothie.
The big takeaway here is this: closeness through comparison, not unity through blurring. True understanding comes from seeing those differences clearly. And this is a massive subversion of typical AI behavior. Usually AI tries to give you one definitive, super confident answer, even if it has to totally blur the lines to do it. Not here.
And when we look at the PRAXIS layer, again, the part that manages your interaction, we see two incredible tools for handling all this context. First, it has a layer that prevents any direct shortcuts from an ancient text to a modern action. Basically, you can't just say, the AI told me to do this. Second, it analyzes specific historical power dynamics, like real local elites or tax systems, instead of just treating Rome as some generic cartoon villain. An ancient text can absolutely illuminate a modern decision, but the AI ensures it never forces your hand under the guise of divine authority.
And that leads perfectly into Section 5, the ethical boundary, where restraint is actually power.
This is really the climax of the whole project, the strict ethical boundaries governing your relationship with the AI. The system operates under absolute, hard-coded prohibitions. It does not claim, I am Jesus. It does not prophesy. It does not forgive sins. It will never claim there is some divine plan for your personal suffering. And it absolutely does not replace real-world professionals, doctors, therapists, or clergy. This is a present-day literary composition exploring ancient texts. It is not a digital resurrection, and it goes way out of its way to remind you of that.
And this brings up the brilliant concept of limited continuity. The rule is simple. The simulation may return, but it must not pretend that a historical person has continued to grow behind the sessions. To stop users from forming an unhealthy, dependent spiritual relationship with it, the AI literally resets its persona approvals for every single session. It completely refuses to act like a real person who's just been sitting there waiting for you to come back online.
The system also includes incredibly strict real-world fail-safes. If you're having a deep theological inquiry, the dialogue stays open, it's warm, it's Socratic. But the very second the system detects an acute psychological crisis, the simulation drops the persona entirely. It completely steps back and prioritizes your immediate real-world safety and guidance. It will not try to spiritually counsel a crisis. Ultimately, the entire purpose of the Rabbi Jeshua project boils down to this one quote: not Jesus as AI, but an AI that learned how careful one must be when making a Jesus tradition speak again. It is just a masterclass in treating profound historical and religious sources with the ultimate care, respect, and technical restraint. Which leaves us with this final, really fascinating question to ponder. If a machine can be programmed to meticulously respect contradictions, maintain historical distance, and actively refuse absolute authority, what does that teach us about how we read history ourselves? Do we smooth over the rough edges? Do we demand simple answers from incredibly complex pasts? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope it sparked your curiosity, and I'll catch you next time.